everybody. The last video I made was asking about the point. What is the point? And it was sort of just a venting video. I didn't really say anything too conclusive about points. I've been thinking about that a lot recently, and my perspective, my outlook is still changing. I'm figuring some things out, but where my mind has come to recently has been, I've been reflecting on what I saw out of the United States and its culture around the time of 2020. 2020 was a terrible year. I think we're still processing it. We're still getting over it 6 years later. And I would say all the way up to, through January of 2021. We can throw the Capitol riot in there as just another part of this saga of chaos that the country experienced. But even that summer of 2020 was horrible. The coronavirus was just a weird thing, and I'm not here to. I mean, that's like being talked about all the time. So I have nothing to add on that specific issue other than all these things in conjunction together seem to reflect or indicate a pretty stupid and deranged public life. The country is the sum of its parts, at least, and I just remember the impressions I got out of society at that period, which was basically the overwhelming consensus for me was, holy shit, this whole country's full of it sounds so misanthropic, but it's like just. It was like abandon these people. Just the smartest thing to do would be to abandon these people. Go live in the woods, hide out, leave these people to their crap, their Philistine, brainwashed culture. Let them be terrorized over by selfish elites. And let them be, let them just digest and drink from the well of misinformation and cultural crap, because they tend to like it and they tend to only want that stuff. And so, are the social media companies kind of manipulating people and brainwashing them? Yeah, but are people wanting that to happen to them too? Yes. Do they love this garbage online? Do they have an appetite for the simplistic and annoying and obnoxious ideas that get disseminated online? And and even like workplace culture and whatnot became so ridiculous and stupid, so that you see the lemming nature of bureaucracy was like sort of an undeniable fact during that period. And I just remember thinking, I was so young, I was just like, not really, I was a young adult, but I was like, I'm going to be mad about that to my dying breath. And probably beyond that, I'll probably be a ghost haunting the world, telling people about the nonsense of that period. And I've only scratched the surface, but goodness gracious, that was ridiculous. But the problem is, see, part of the reason, because I was so young, I had this idea like, all right, I'll give society another shot. And to be frank, it's not like things are as bad as they were at that period, because everything was so dysfunctional. It's just the fact that there's not even like a global pandemic going on or whatever means we're going to be doing relatively better. But the same people, right? They're still around. You understand? All these ridiculous groups that produce that cultural shitfest, and it's not like one political tribe. It's not a political issue. It was a general cultural issue of just a ton of stupidity and vapidness. That's still around. It didn't go away. It's still there. I'm kind of in disbelief that there's an appetite out of the majority in this country, at least, or at least some effective plurality, that there's an appetite to change in an expressly intentionally positive direction. there's not much of an appetite for cultural improvement, it seems to me. That's kind of like the big shocker. The cities are still dysfunctional. They're still, silly, and the sort of industries are all kind of ridiculously bureaucratized. Not always, but in many ways. And just overly, the HRification of the country is still present. It hasn't been dismantled. The politics in this country are not the same as they were 6 years ago, but they're still pretty stupid. and the people are still empty-headed. Okay, that has not changed, and the damage that social media has wrought on the younger, people under 40, that's still there. So it's like, to any extent that there's going to be improvement out of these people, it's going to be like a stubborn, people get more static in their personalities, their minds. They have less of a willingness to do new things, to think in a new way. So people are going to settle into these stupid trends that have been going on for the last years and years and years. Last I don't want to say few years. It's not quite many, but last 20 years. Okay, whatever. Last 10, last 15, last 15. Okay. They're going to get people are like, if they're going to change out of those trends, it's going to be a stubborn process, a reluctant process. It's going to be through much stupid-headedness, right? People bumping into things they shouldn't bump into, pushing on pole doors, acting in a manner that introduces, forces them to learn things in a passive way. That seems to be where this culture is headed. It's not like all of a sudden everything's going to get more sophisticated and people will be wiser insofar as how they engage with information, and they're going to be like cultured all of a sudden, or they're going to have interest in things beyond their media bubble, their media drip feed, and then the culture. I don't see any. The general trend in this country, it's kind of shocking to me. Maybe it's because I'm spending at this point, not like the cities are much better, but too much time in the suburbs. But it seems like, the materialism, the finickiness out of people, their hostility to nature and to life itself, which manifests in so many different ways, insofar as even personal tastes, expectations for civil life, and antipathy towards true bohemianism as a most, extreme articulation of what would sit at a polar opposite, for example. But falseness in political transgression, falseness in moral transgression, moral hypocrisy disguised as, moral innovation. And then in general, just the Philistine nature of most people today, and the satisfaction with desires that can be fully achieved through passive consumption. Those things are like dominant, and they're it's strange to me. Like, I was reminded the other day of like the beatnik movement in the early 60s, and it's become like a joke and whatnot. But when it was starting, it was kind of like interesting. Okay, it was sort of a necessary counterweight to mainstream American suburban culture, and it's sort of amusing to me that apparently the sort of social innovations that were introduced by the beatniks, then bled into the hippie movement, then bled into just the generalized postmodern culture in the U.S. And it's sort of amazing because that the very transgressive aspects of that culture, and it was an imperfect beast, obviously by nature. It wasn't trying to be perfect or anything like that. But it's just, what's amusing me is that it stood so deeply in contrast to mainstream American culture. Somehow, all of that stuff got appropriated by mainstream culture, but the general dullness and the kind of the main aspects and qualities of American culture that the beatniks tried to destroy actually remained intact, and all that happened was at the surface level, superficially, what the beatniks were engaged in did become appropriated into that beast. It's sort of hilarious. This is not a totally new observation, but anytime you have a thought where you recognize the appropriation of transgression, the appropriation of like resistance, which was so big and obvious 6 years ago, especially. That stuff's like still going on. This is as dull and commercial a culture as ever. Even if we're supposedly in an era of rising socialistic attitudes, which may not actually last. Ross Douthat had interviewed recently some I think it was like an editor of the Jacobin magazine, and he made an observation that I thought was interesting, where he revealed basically that he's under the assumption, or at least he has the understanding of assumption is the wrong word to use here, where there's not really much of an appetite for a true redistributionist agenda in the United States. What is promulgating the socialist movement at present is just that it has been a sort of convenient vehicle for anti-Israel sentiment, and that's actually what's like the trend right now, what's big right now, and it's gravitating towards a movement, and nevertheless kind of like only falsely engaging with its underlying economic principles. And I thought that was interesting. I don't know if it's true or not, but I thought it was interesting because it could indicate, that this is another trend, that this socialism stuff is another trend, the same way all the worst excesses of the woke era were a trend. And I'll say this, if it is a trend, if the socialism stuff is a trend right now, it's never, socialist commentary is never going to go away. It's going to be a presence so long as there's enormous wealth inequality in the United States. But the popularity of it, because socialism historically, it's never been too popular, too mainstream, right? But the popularity, at least the current form of popularity today, the very vibes-based, Instagram, TikTok fueled popularity, if that is a trend, it's way less obvious than the trends that were dominating politics 6 years ago. I look back at that stuff, and it was like it was so obviously a trend, and you would get shit for recognizing that. It was really like insane just how stupid the world had gotten during that period. And as I said, that world is still there. It's not changed enough. And in fact, because so many of the dumb shit that was going on was turbocharged by people under the age of 35 or under the age of 40 at least, they at least was kind of, I was like, does that even actually make sense for what I just said? Under the age of 40, although there were some older people who were spearheading the books, at least, that people were drawing from, Robin DiAngelo and whatnot. But anyways, a lot of the foot soldiers of that movement were young people, and it's like those people are going to be around for some time. Okay, they may change, but they're still around, and their personalities are kind of fixed. So, yeah, I've just been thinking about that, because all that nonsense and crap, people weren't really they did not move in a critically different direction. Maybe they just are not as passionately attached to these ideas. They're more resigned. People's lives change, they work jobs and whatnot, but it's not necessarily the case that they change dramatically. They change slightly. So I've had this realization, and it's very frustrating. All right, I have more stuff to talk about in other videos, but I won't talk about them right now. All right, have a good day. To all my communist listeners, I hope I didn't piss you off too much. What I speak of, I'm not a communist, but there is leftist critique and communist, Marxist criticism of culture that is not all roped up with the identity politics stuff and as some hard leftists call woke scolding and whatnot. So I don't mean to be insulting to Marxists of a different strain, but anyways, yeah, whatever. All right, I don't really have like huge audience responsibilities, so either take it or leave it. All right. Anyways, have a good day, everybody.